The little girl had stopped screaming hours ago. Not because the monsters had gone, but because her throat was raw and her ears had already heard her brother's final breath. She crouched beneath the hydrofarm table, wrapped in her mother's coat, while the heat from the plasma fire outside melted the walls like wax. Through the broken slats, she saw one of them. 7 feet tall, muscle-plated with black gold armor, a helmet shaped like a bird's skull. It didn't walk. It glided. Its clawed hand dragged something across the floor. Her father's boot. She clutched the emergency radio in her shaking hands and whispered the last thing she ever said into it. "They're playing with us. Like toys." Then silence. That was the last transmission Earth ever got from Aribos colony before the signal vanished. The command center beneath Mount Aribos was always cold. That morning, it felt like the heart of a morgue. Screens flickered with static and broken feeds, each one once tied to a part of the colony. Agriculture dome, gone. Atmosphere refinery, gone. Medical sector, charred. The men and women in that war room had stared down alien threats before, but this time, no one spoke. The elites weren't an invasion force. They were something worse. A weapon test. A performance. One general finally broke the silence. He stood, his voice flat as concrete. "I warned you. They weren't going to negotiate." Another officer, pale with a cracked voice, mumbled through dry lips. "They slaughtered 3,000 people in 9 minutes. The general didn't blink. And they're not done. You think they came for Aribos? No. They came for us. Aribos was just the trailer." While politicians scrambled and postured and demanded impossible retaliations, while senators asked how this could happen to an outpost so heavily fortified, one man sat in the dark corner of the room, arms folded, eyes scanning the data. His name was Carver. Retired colonel. Recalled only for situations described in a classified protocol called Eclipse Black. He waited for the yelling to die. Then he leaned forward and spoke 4 words that instantly silenced the room. "Drop the lone wolf." At first, no one moved. A few even laughed nervously. But the general didn't. He looked at Carver, long and hard, then turned to the panel. "Confirmed?" Carver nodded. 900 confirmed kills. All black book. 0 court-martials. 0 captures. 1 asset. 1 mission. 1 result. In a separate chamber, a dusty black file was retrieved from the vault. The folder was marked only with a designation, Gideon. The man inside the file wasn't born. He was made. Bred through Earth's last-gen soldier initiative, trained beyond human limits, and deployed only when wars turned suicidal. Most thought he died years ago. Official records said he disappeared after the Titan rebellion on Europa. But off-record, Carver knew better. Gideon had retired himself. Disappeared into the wilderness. Built himself a grave to crawl into. Because monsters like him don't get happy endings. They only get silence. Until someone screams loud enough to wake them. The recovery team didn't use satellites. Gideon knew how to blind those. They went by rumor, by weather patterns, by heat traces that didn't match any animal. 3 days later they found him. A cabin half swallowed by snow and pine, a generator running on silence, and a man sitting in the dark, cleaning a disassembled rifle like it was a ritual. He didn't reach for a weapon. Didn't even look up when they entered. His voice was calm. "Took you long enough." The lead agent stepped forward, hesitant. "We have a situation." Gideon slowly reassembled a part. "You don't get dropped on my doorstep unless the devil's in orbit. So let's skip the song and dance." They laid the data chip on the table. Gideon scanned the footage. Corpses burned. Children running. The elites didn't just kill, they performed. They filmed themselves taunting survivors, forcing them to dig graves, then buried them alive and broadcasted over civilian channels. Gideon didn't flinch. He watched every frame like a surgeon watches a tumor being extracted. Then he looked up and asked one question. "Are there any civilians left?" The agent nodded. "A few. One group still transmitting on backup power." He leaned back. "Then I'm going. No escort. No briefcase politicians. No drones. Just me and a pod. And if anyone calls to check in, tell them I'm not there to save anyone. I'm there to make sure the galaxy doesn't forget what humans do when we bury our dead. At Earth's last classified weapons cache, deep in an Arctic ice vault, Gideon walked the narrow halls like a monk among relics. Rows of forgotten tech. Prototype weapons never greenlit. Too brutal. Too expensive. Too dangerous. He passed all of it until he reached a black steel locker marked only with an old unit number. He entered the code manually. No scans. No retina locks. Inside was a rifle so long it had its own bipod stabilization spine, a blade tuned to vibrate at a lethal frequency undetectable to modern armor, and a grav belt last used in a forgotten zero-G boarding operation. He strapped on everything slowly, without a word. One of the techs whispered to another, "Why do they call him Lone Wolf?" Gideon heard. He muttered, "Because I don't pack." The launch pad wasn't a base. It was a hole in the tundra, built for one shot, one pod, one man. The atmosphere was vicious. Wind snapped around him as he climbed in. Someone tried to hand him a comms relay. He stared at it. "If I need backup, I already failed." As the clamps closed, a technician murmured Godspeed. Gideon gave him a sideways glance. "God's not going where I'm going." The pod screamed skyward, a trail of ice and fire cutting across the dawn. Minutes later, Earth's last soldier was gone. Back in the war room, Carver lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. One of the aides asked quietly, "What now?" The general didn't look up. "Now? Now we pray the elites are dumb enough to stay. Because Gideon's not going to fight them. He's going to haunt them." The screen showed the last telemetry from the pod. Planetfall in 2 hours. Contact zone, the remains of the colony's hydrofarm. Estimated survivor count, under 10. Estimated enemy presence, over 400. Gideon's chances of survival? Irrelevant. Because he wasn't sent to survive. He was sent to remind the galaxy that Earth may lose its colonies, but it never forgets its dead. And when it sends one back to collect, it doesn't send a hero. It sends a shadow. The drop pod hit the upper atmosphere of Aribos like a flaming coffin, shaking violently as it tore through the dense layers of manipulated climate shielding. Gideon didn't flinch. He sat strapped in silence, eyes closed, mentally counting the seconds between impacts, the sharp tilt of trajectory, the rate of descent. Outside, the world turned orange. Inside, it remained cold. He had done this too many times to remember, but this one felt different. There were no reinforcements following him. No backup. No extraction plan. There was only the mission, and that meant going in silent and burning everything that moved. He felt the heat flare around the hull as the pod cracked through cloud cover, spiraling in toward the landing zone. The landscape came into view, black craters, shredded domes, charred skeletons of what used to be civilization. A ruined paradise. His boots hit the ground 10 seconds after the pod crashed into a canyon just beyond the colony's west perimeter. No welcoming committee. No gunfire. Just the low hum of distant patrols and the smell of ash hanging in the wind. He moved fast. No time to orient. He knew the terrain from colony schematics. His target was the last reported survivor beacon, located near an underground hydrofarm bunker that had once been used as an auxiliary food storage facility. It wasn't built to withstand a siege, but it was remote enough to be overlooked in a blitz. He kept low, passing through what had once been a trade road but now looked like a gallery of corpses. Bodies strung from light poles. Torched vehicles. Civilian skeletons fused to playground equipment. The elites hadn't just killed, they'd staged every death like an exhibit. As he passed a shattered residential block, something flickered in the upper window. A child's stuffed toy tied to a broken antenna. A taunt. He moved faster. The first contact happened near a collapsed tunnel. 3 elites patrolling, scanning with shoulder-mounted sensors. Gideon dropped flat behind a charred bus, watched their pattern, waited for the lead to step forward. Then silence. A sharp whistle. 1 second. 2. The last elite turned to check on his flank and found nothing. By the time his partner reacted, Gideon had already moved. No shots fired. Just a blade between the vertebrae and a collapsed jugular. The third one tried to call out but choked on his own blood before the warning could escape. Gideon dragged the bodies into the rubble and kept moving. If they knew he was here, they'd close in fast. But not yet. Not until he was ready. He reached the hydrofarm by dusk. The hatch was scorched, partially buried, and covered in makeshift debris. It took 6 minutes to unseal without making noise. Inside, it smelled of mildew, desperation, and recycled air. He crept down the stairwell, boots silent on metal. The light was minimal. A small solar unit buzzed weakly from a corner, barely illuminating the narrow shelter. He expected corpses. Instead, a small blade met his throat. A woman's voice, dry and sharp. "Drop the weapon or I kill you." He didn't move. Not yet. Her hands were steady, which impressed him. Most civilians would have been trembling. He finally whispered, "If you could kill me that fast, you wouldn't have warned me." There was a pause. Then a sigh. The blade lowered. The woman was mid-30s, oil smeared on her neck, one eye swollen, and a crude bandage wrapped around her thigh. She introduced herself as Tara, a former engineer from the colony's water treatment division. Behind her were 3 children and an older man with a fractured leg. None of them looked like they'd slept in days. They'd been hiding since the second wave, surviving on nutrient packs and melted snow. Gideon scanned the shelter quickly, noting the exits, the traps, the wiring. Not bad for amateurs. He opened his pack and began distributing water, small protein tubes, and a roll of improvised grenades. Tara frowned. "You're not here to evacuate us, are you?" He shook his head. "I'm here to erase them. That's the only rescue you're getting." For the next few hours, he worked in silence. Reinforced the hatch with steel braces. Rewired the comm unit with a signal loop to simulate static. Created 2 fallback traps using a broken mining charge and a can of polymer adhesive. Tara watched him without speaking. Finally, she asked the question that had been burning on her tongue since he arrived. "Who are you?" Gideon paused, tapping a fuse against his knee. "I'm the guy they buried 10 years ago and prayed they'd never have to dig up." One of the kids, a boy no older than 10, sat near the vent watching him assemble a rifle nearly as long as his body. He spoke up softly. "My dad said Earth doesn't have soldiers anymore. Just drones." Gideon gave a faint smirk. "I'm what they send when the drones scream for help." Later that night, they heard movement above. A scout team. 2 elites. Gideon nodded to Tara and slipped out the rear hatch. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The kids were silent. Suddenly, a dull thump echoed above. Then another. A scrape of metal. Then a scream that gurgled to a stop. By the time Gideon returned, he was wiping something dark from his gloves. He sat without speaking. Tara didn't ask what happened. She simply handed him a thermal blanket and nodded toward the corner. "You'll need rest. There'll be more tomorrow." He didn't take the blanket. He didn't sleep. He sat, staring into the dim, red light of the vent, listening. Always listening. In the early hours of the next morning, a rumble sounded from the north. Not an explosion. Something heavier. Rhythmic. Gideon stepped outside and scanned the ridge. A convoy. 4-legged walkers. Automated hover tanks. At least 100 troops. They were setting up a forward base in the crater. He returned to the bunker and said nothing. Just grabbed his rifle and disappeared again. Tara tried to follow. He stopped her. "If you see a flash on the horizon tonight, don't come looking. Just know they screamed first." Then he was gone, already a shadow in the fog. That night, the sky over Aribos turned orange once more. Not from plasma fire, but from a controlled detonation deep in the crater. Survivors hiding in the distant forests watched in silence as the smoke rose, thick and black, swirling with red embers like a signal to the stars. A child whispered, "What was that?" Tara held him close and whispered back, That was the monster under their bed. And now, he's awake. The crater still burned at sunrise. Black smoke curled into the gray sky as the ash drifted over the ruined colony like snow. The enemy's base, once lined with scanners and plasma turrets, was now just a skeletal wreck of twisted metal and shattered armor. From the edge of the ridge, Tara stared at the scorched remains through a cracked pair of binoculars. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Behind her, the older man whispered something that sounded like a prayer, or maybe a curse. One of the children peeked from behind the half-buried shelter door and asked if the monsters were gone. Tara didn't answer. Gideon hadn't come back. And when the man who walked into hell didn't return, the question wasn't if he succeeded, it was what else he left behind. Gideon was alive, but barely. He had crawled out of the crater's north slope with burns on his right shoulder and a piece of shrapnel lodged under his ribs. The explosion had triggered a fault line beneath the mining bed, collapsing half the tunnel system and burying him under tons of debris. He'd only made it out by detonating a fallback charge to blast an exit through the collapsed rocks. Now, bruised and bloodied, he stalked through the low hills surrounding the colony like a predator looking for his next kill. He knew the elites would respond. They always did. This wasn't a victory. This was bait. A big enough wound to draw the enemy's pride into the open. It worked. The elites didn't retreat. They regrouped. Fast. In less than 6 hours, a new command unit was dropped onto Aribos. Their leader wasn't just another soldier. He was something different. Taller, leaner, with a silver crest along his armor and neural lines that pulsed with blue light. His name was Virek, and unlike the others, he didn't see Gideon as a target. He saw him as a puzzle. Virek had studied Earth's military history, dissected human behavior, and learned that every species had a breaking point. He activated his empathic sensors and began tracking emotional residue from the crater. Rage. Pain. Resolve. He smiled. The soldier was still alive. Good. He wanted to watch him die slowly. By late afternoon, the first retaliation wave hit. 5 squads swept the surrounding area, flushing out the perimeter and torching anything that moved. Gideon had already relocated the survivors to a deeper fallback shelter within the water filtration tunnels. He reinforced the doors with magnetic locks and laid down 6 traps between the upper entrance and their new safe zone. The children didn't ask questions this time. Even the older man followed orders without resistance. They had seen the crater. They had felt the ground shake. And they knew, somehow, that Gideon was the reason they were still breathing. He didn't stay with them. He moved alone, carving a path back into the colony's ruins. That night, he set up on the upper ridge with his sniper, lining up shots on the new patrols with surgical patience. He didn't fire in bursts. He fired once every 5 minutes. Each shot a lesson. Each kill calculated to send a message. One went down mid-scan. Another had his helmet explode as he gave orders. A third was hit through 2 walls and a support beam. Virek noticed. He recognized the rhythm. This wasn't just suppression. This was art. He issued new orders. Don't chase the ghost. Trap him. Gideon anticipated it. He began to feed them false trails, scratched symbols, broken helmets, fake blood trails leading in circles. He even left one body intact with a message burned into the armor: "You're not hunting. You're being studied." Virek was impressed. Not angry. Not shaken. He simply adapted. He sent a drone disguised as a wounded human child, limping through the woods. Gideon spotted the heat signature mismatch instantly, and disabled it with a dart. But the distraction worked. A second team breached the filtration tunnels while he was away. Inside the tunnel shelter, chaos erupted. The magnetic door jammed. Tara tried to buy time, rerouting power from the reserve battery. The children hid beneath the support pipes. The older man, trembling, picked up a wrench and stood near the entry gate like a sentry from a forgotten war. When the first elite dropped through the vent, Tara detonated the fallback charge, flooding the corridor with pressurized steam. It bought them 2 minutes. 2 minutes was enough. Because in the third minute, the temperature dropped. The shadows moved. And then the metal groaned. The elites turned, expecting an ambush. What they got was something worse. Gideon came through the upper vent like a falling star, dropping directly onto the lead attacker with a blade in one hand and a gravity bomb in the other. The explosion blew 3 of them backward. The 4th one tried to run. Gideon didn't let him. In 6 seconds, the fight was over. The survivors stared in stunned silence as he stood in the middle of the smoke, shoulders rising and falling, blood dripping from his elbow. Tara stepped forward and reached out as if to thank him. But he didn't look at her. He just said one thing. I made a mistake. I thought they wouldn't use bait. That one's on me. That night, they relocated again. Gideon didn't speak much. He worked in silence, constructing a new trap near the old refinery ruins. This one was bigger. More dangerous. He was building something designed not just to kill, but to broadcast. A reminder. A declaration. A warning. Tara finally spoke after hours of silence. Why are you doing this? You could have stayed on Earth. You could have disappeared. You don't know anyone here anything. Gideon looked up at her, his eyes tired but clear. I owe it to the people who never got a chance to fight back. They died screaming. I want the elites to die remembering that sound. Vyrek, watching from his orbital command ship, reviewed the latest data with curiosity. His analysts reported fear readings in the soldiers deployed to Aribos. Increasing panic. Breakdown in discipline. He nodded. Fear is valuable. It's how civilizations collapse. But then he replayed one particular clip, a security feed from the refinery ruins, just before it was destroyed. In it, Gideon looked directly at the camera, as if he knew it was watching. Then he smiled. A small, deliberate, human smile. Vyrek froze the frame. Rewound it. Stared at it for a full minute. And for the first time since the operation began, he felt something strange flicker in his chest. A sensation unfamiliar. Not fear. Something colder. Something deeper. The enemy wasn't behaving like prey. The enemy wasn't reacting like a cornered beast. The enemy had turned the battlefield into a stage. And Vyrek, despite all his enhancements, realized he might be watching a show that didn't end with victory. It ended with a warning carved into the bones of every soldier who ever dared to underestimate what Earth called a man. The night air over Aribos was heavy with static and tension. The survivors huddled in the filtration tunnel, listening to the distant hum of hover tanks and guarded whispers echoing through the ventilation shaft. Gideon sat against the wall, bleeding slowly from a thigh wound sustained during the refinery trap. He pressed the cloth to the gash, eyes fixed on the flickering red light of emergency lamps. Terror and defiance mingled in the tunnel, like two halves of a broken promise. It was quiet, but not peaceful. Here, even silence had a pulse. By dawn, the enemy's counteroffensive began. The sonic thrum of artillery cannons shook the ground. Above, skyships circled, scanning for movement. Into that air, Vyrek's voice came over intercepted comms, calm and measured as if offering a gift. Gideon of Earth, he said, we know you're protecting survivors. If they die, you die. If you stop, they live. Choose. The words cut through the tunnel like a blade. A test. A taunt. In that moment, Gideon understood something new. This wasn't war. It was chess. And humans were the pieces. He uncorked the wound, letting fresh blood stain the floor as he stood. He was playing too. No one moved when he nodded at Tara. A simple signal. Get the children and old man out. He'd cover them. But as they prepared, Tara paused and touched his arm. She didn't look at him. She looked into whatever was left of him beneath the armor and burned scars and whispered, "We're not pawns." He didn't answer. Instead, he handed her a data pad. It contained coordinates deeper underground, an old cryo-research vault. Perfect for holding out. He told them to leave immediately when he gave the signal. She nodded, and led them through the narrow service passages, guided by flickering lights and pre-carved waypoints. Each step echoed like a promise. Once the survivors were gone, Gideon sealed the tunnel with a timed explosive, locking the enemy into the choke point. Then he retreated to the refinery ruins, where he had rigged a larger network of charges connected to geothermal pressure vents. This trap was a monument, a message that Earth could still rewrite the laws of war. Across the canyon, the elites assembled, Virex supervising, soldiers arranged in ranks before the collapsed skyline. Their scanners pulsed with warnings. They'd studied the tunnel blast. They expected retaliation. They were patient. They were certain. Gideon did not show himself. Instead, he triggered the charges remotely. The ground rumbled as shafts collapsed, steam and molten gas burst upward. The shockwave rolled out. A blood-red aurora of dust and fire crowned the ruin. Gibbed elites and crushed tanks tumbled like toys. The enemy command unit, watching through drones, reeled. Virek tilted his head as if learning something. Then he spoke to them. This is not over. That night, Aribos' hard lights went silent. Gideon crept toward the enemy forward camp, a lattice of tents and generators pitched near the rim of the biggest crater. He moved through shadows 5 hours after detonations. His body ached, his breathing rasped. But his mind was clear. He wore the scalp of a fallen elite as a twisted trophy. It fit his face like a broken mask. He stalked the camp alone, using every trick ever taught. Thermal decoys. EM scramblers. Pulse darts. At the entrance he found Virek's tent. No heavy guard, no signs of overconfidence, it was respect. He stepped inside. Virek stood, unarmed except for his pulse staff lossy with low-energy charge. The air was stale hot. No words. Then they faced each other. The alien looked human-built, skin pale under the cresting helmet, eyes glowing in neuroconduits. Virek raised the staff ready. Gideon held his blade dark. Firelight trembled over bent metal. Then Gideon spoke, "You study us. I study pain." They sprang. The fight came fast and brutal. Blades clashed sparks. Flesh met armor plating. Gideon took 2 burns to his chest shield. Virek's staff nicked his shoulder plate. Then Gideon baited him. Rolled under the strike, plunging his blade between ribs. They both froze, Gideon's blade cold, Virek's voice a fallen melody in the silence. Gideon withdrew the weapon. Blood blossomed. Their eyes locked. The hunter and the predator reversed positions. In that moment Virek saw the shape of human will, fractured, brutal, unbreakable. He dropped to one knee. Then another. Gideon let the blade drop and stood. He didn't gloat. He didn't kill him. He walked away. Virek watched him go. Then whispered a single sentence into comms. Enemy soldier standing down. Signal cease fire. He later admitted they delayed further operations to analyze Gideon's brain-death pattern. They never expected mercy. Back in the tunnel, Gideon hobbled to the evac vault. Smoke trailed from his armor vents. Tara and the kids were waiting. She ran to him, fear and relief mixing in her face. They got him inside. She pressed stimgel to his wounds. His voice was softer now. "I couldn't go with you. You needed a place." He looked at the children. Tired, hungry, but alive. That was enough. He whispered that he'd wait on the ridge. He passed them his rifle, telling Tara to hide it somewhere only she'd know. He staggered back toward the surface glitch zone. Earth Command, billions of kilometers away, intercepted Virek's signal, a surrender or death wish, they didn't know which. They paused on retaliation protocols. In the command bunker, Carver pressed a clenched hand into his palm. They pulled the plug on reinforcements. Gideon had bought enough time. At dawn, Gideon climbed to the ragged cliff overlooking the colony. The ground beneath him still trembled from the crater blast. In his grip the blade and rifle. No fire left in his eyes. Virek's emissary arrived at the ridge, unarmed and bearing a small white flag. The emissary carried a datapad with a hologram of Earth's command icons, a call for parley. The alien didn't smile. But his tone held something unmistakable: respect. They spoke through the pad. Promise of prisoners returned. Safe exit guaranteed. Terraforming data in exchange for withdrawal. Gideon listened. Then he stepped forward and destroyed the datapad with a single shot. Then he spoke humanity's only demand: leave our people in peace, or never return. He fired into the ground. The alien paused. Then signaled their own stand down. The hover tanks withdrew. The skyships veered off. The crater lay silent again, this time frozen. Gideon remained on the ridge. Earth Command ordered extraction. He refused. They asked why. He said that someone needed to stay on Aribos. To remind them and anyone else that Earth does not abandon. Terra located him later in a broken hydrofarm greenhouse. He smiled small and ragged when he saw her. She handed him water, then knelt before him. The survivors were safe. They had a chance. He nodded. Then said two simple words: job done? He stayed. He dared the galaxy to test Earth again. Above, skyships retreated. Below, one soldier grounded, making sure no one else would scream without answer. The wind on Aribos never stopped. It howled through the dead colony like a ghost, stirring ashes that would never settle. Gideon sat at the edge of the highest ridge, where the broken antennas once streamed data back to Earth. Now they leaned like dead branches, silent and rusted. He had been sitting there for hours, staring out at the empty crater where the elites had tried to raise their fortress. The fires were out. The bodies had been buried by dust and time. But his mind stayed sharp. He didn't wait for orders anymore. He waited for a mistake. Because someone out there would eventually forget what happened on Aribos. Someone always did. Back on Earth, the silence from the elites was unsettling. Surveillance showed a complete withdrawal from Aribos space. No transmissions. No movement. No retaliation. Just quiet retreat. Command reviewed Gideon's field footage for days. What they saw was not just a counterattack. It was a campaign of psychological collapse. The enemy hadn't been defeated through numbers or weapons. They had been broken, piece by piece, by one man who refused to die. Public records redacted the incident. Aribos was listed as an environmental failure. But in the war rooms below Earth's crust, whispers passed between officers. Stories that one soldier had done what no fleet ever could. And they all agreed on one thing. Gideon wasn't just a weapon. He was a promise. Vyrek survived, but barely. His injuries were not just physical. Something had unraveled in his core, something he didn't understand. In a report filed to the Galactic Elite Command Council, he described Gideon in one phrase that would later be echoed across alien war colleges for decades. He said the human wasn't faster, or stronger, or more advanced. He was simply unafraid of ending everything. That is the kind of enemy we cannot model. That is the kind we run from. After that, the elite forces did not speak of Aribos again. Maps were updated. A red ring marked the system. Not hostile. Not occupied. Just one word in bold across the sector: denied. Within the ruins of the colony, the survivors began rebuilding quietly. Terra led the effort, organizing what few materials remained, repairing what she could. The children were older now. They learned to hunt the planet's wildlife, to ration, to listen for wind patterns. Sometimes they asked about Gideon. Why he never came down from the ridge. Terra would only smile and say, because he's still watching. He sees farther than we do. He listens to things we can't hear. She didn't tell them what he told her the last time they spoke. That as long as someone stood watch, they wouldn't need soldiers. Just one reminder. Then, one day, something unexpected happened. A signal arrived from a passing civilian research vessel scanning deep space for mineral data. It bounced off a relay they thought was dead, one of the old colony satellites that had miraculously powered on for just long enough to blink. The message was short. A distorted image. Gideon, standing in the crater at sunrise, holding a severed elite banner in one hand. His face weathered, beard thick, eyes still sharp. The caption wasn't a speech. It wasn't a warning. It was just 4 words burned into the data file. Send more. I'm waiting. The video went viral in secret channels. It was never shown to the public, but among Earth's defenders, it became a myth. Soldiers painted his silhouette on armor. Recruits studied his tactics and simulations. A few dared to call him a ghost. Others called him humanity's wrath. But none of them denied what he had done. The man with 900 kills was no longer just a statistic. He had become the answer to a question no enemy should ever ask. Earth Command attempted contact twice more. Both times he ignored them. A care package was dropped, medical gear, fresh rations, a backup comms relay. It vanished before the drone could scan him. He was always watching. Always one step ahead. Some thought he would die out there. Others believed he already had, and what remained was something different. Something built from hate and honor and memory. Something that made enemies hesitate before landing on a blue-green world in the back corner of the galaxy. Then, one cycle later, a new threat appeared. A mercenary fleet targeting another colony, this time on the edge of Sector 9. Earth Command prepared a response. Tactical units mobilized. But before the fleet could arrive, the mercs turned around. No battle. No warning. When interrogated, one captured pilot admitted they intercepted a broadcast. An untraceable loop beamed from somewhere in the Aribos system. A simple feed of a man cleaning a rifle, surrounded by helmets. The merc said, "We don't mess with haunted ground." On Aribos, the seasons shifted. Ash gave way to wind. Wind gave way to storms. Gideon moved like the weather. He built no home. He marked no trail. Yet every survivor could still feel him. Watching from the ridgeline. Shifting among the shadows. Tara sometimes climbed to the highest point when she needed clarity. She'd find footprints, a fresh burn mark in the dirt, a spent round. Proof he was still alive. She'd leave a note. He never replied, but he never missed one either. Years passed. The colony rebuilt. Children became scouts. Tara's voice became the new leadership. But the myth never faded. And one day, a child, no longer scared of the world, asked her why Gideon had stayed when he could have gone home. Tara looked up at the sky, her voice steady. Because Earth is not just a place. It's an idea. And Gideon made sure no one would ever forget what happens when you try to erase it. Far away, at the edge of the galaxy, other species studied the reports. The galactic elites restructured their doctrine. They began factoring in a new variable to every assault. Not a weapon. Not a force. A name. Gideon. Not a myth. A calculation. One man's life had changed the terms of war. He never made speeches. He never waved flags. He just walked alone into fire and made sure it didn't come back. In the final footage ever captured of him, a scout drone flew low over the old battlefield. It caught a glimpse of a figure standing beside a rusted antenna, cloak billowing in the wind. The figure looked up. Eyes locked on the camera. No anger. No smile. Just presence. The drone short-circuited before it could transmit more. Earth Command received only one frame. They archived it in a secure vault, under the highest clearance. The file name was simple. Aribos Protocol. Subheading, Legends Never Die. And Gideon, the man who was once a ghost with a rifle, remained where he belonged. On the edge of humanity's reach. Watching. Waiting. Because peace is just the pause between wars. And someone always has to stand where others fell, so the rest don't have to.